Okay, I'm sitting here with David Gordon, who is famously the editor of the Mises Review, the quarterly publication that reviews literature and economics and philosophy and politics and a million other subjects. Right, David? How do you decide what books you're going to review anyway?
Well, I don't have any really systematic way of doing it. I just pick ones that seem interesting as they come up. Sometimes I run into problems in that I read books and then intend to review them, and then by the time it's time to do an issue of the magazine, it's quite some time and I have to go back and look at the book again, because I do all the reading first before I write the reviews.
Do you really? You read the whole book?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then I read all the books, and then when it's time to do the review, then I just pick various ones that of the ones I read and do reviews from.
It's funny. People have different techniques. Sometimes a person can start to prepare a review and be so engaged in the book, so riveted by it that, well, at least for some of us, you inadvertently find yourself. One of the failings is you adopt the voice of in your review of the writer, that you can't be objective about it anymore. Do you have that temptation?
That's occasionally happened. I remember I was reviewing a book by Garrett's essays, and I sort of took over a little bit of a style.
It sometimes happens.
He had a very lyrical style, and it influenced me. And that style influenced me. I was doing another review of a book I was rather negative on by Walter Burns, and I put in a little Garrett style in that.
I was thinking about a case. Did you ever read Mises' letter to Ayn Rand?
Oh yes.
Yeah. Do you agree that he seems to adopt something of a Randian style?
Especially when he's saying how she stressed the elites, and he thought this was a very good idea. Yeah. Of course, Mises himself. It was funny, although you don't find this too much in writers from other countries who are writing in English, but he had a very direct, punchy style.
Yeah, he did.
A bit like
but do you think that his letter to her was even punchier than?
Yes, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think he obviously read
he was really swept up in it.
Yeah.
I guess that's what happens when you read it 1,000 or 900, however long the novel is.
Yeah.
You get sort of wrapped up into the worldview of the writer. Do you ever do this? Before you read a book, you've got a title, you've got the back cover and everything. Do you ever write down before you've read the book what big points you're seeking to address? You're seeking to find, or what the big scheme is?
Well, it sometimes happens. Say when I get a particular book, if I know something about the subject, I'll know that the author is. I want to see what the author has to say about certain arguments. Let me see. For example, I reviewed one recently by Martha Nussbaum, so I wanted to see in her previous work she doesn't mention any of the libertarian arguments. I want to see, is she going to say anything at all about this? And she tends very often to just assume her views to be correct and not argue for them. So I wanted to check, is she going to give any arguments this time for the view? Of course she didn't. But
so you tend to have something in mind that you want to, in particular, that you want to look at.
Not always. Sometimes it works out that way. I mean, sometimes there are particular points that I'm interested in. I'll look for those in the book, like one thing that comes up, say, in books on political philosophy is in most mainstream writing these days in political philosophy, there's an assumption that there's something wrong with inequality, and particularly the assumption is that it's unfair that people get much more income or wealth than others simply because they happen to be born with talents or abilities that are valued by the market. So I very often will look, what does the author say about that point, and I try to relate it to earlier reviews that I wrote.
Yeah, this comes through in your reviews, and your reviews can be sometimes so intimidating. You think, well, thank goodness I never wrote a book. Yeah, I mean, you're an exacting reviewer in the sense that it's not enough that people arrive at the right conclusions. That is really clear from your review, that you're glad for people to write libertarian books, but what you're really interested in is whether they've justified the position they're taking.
Oh yes. That's one thing I'm very keen on is the structure of the argument. I want to see, does the person know how to reason properly? And sometimes it's gotten me into trouble. Actually, the reviews that I've gotten most criticism on are the ones that are where I've been critical of books that are more or less on our side, because people are always glad if I attack the anti-capitalist one, but sometimes I've criticized ones that are somewhat free market because I didn't care for some of the arguments, and then people don't like that. Now, I tend to be, it's perhaps not a very good habit of mine, but I tend to be, if I can find slight mistakes in details, I tend to jump on those, especially if I don't like the author very much. It's always fun to get
haven't lobbied you enough to
minor points.
Yeah. You know, there are some books, though, that... well, let me ask you if you agree with this. That there's some books that don't do well in justifying the position they're taking, but the position that they assert, without proof or analytical substance, they assert a worldview that's so inspiring that it's worth reading.
Oh yes, very much so. I mean, I don't. I mean, say if an author is not aiming to be a professional philosopher, he's just giving a popular treatment, I don't sort of insist that they have all the fine points. I mean, if somebody's writing I wouldn't say, for example, Garrett didn't consider various academic writers at the time. He did a very good job with what he was doing.
So you really do have a different standard for somebody who's purporting to do philosophy or economic theory than you would from somebody who's just in a position of a public advocate.
Oh, very much so. I mean, I try to take I try to take them for what they're attempting to do. I mean, I mean, for example, you mentioned Ayn Rand. I never did any reviews of her, but I mean, if I reviewed one of her fictional works, I wouldn't criticize her for philosophical mistakes. But I mean, say if I did. Now, see, this is an example of how one has to make distinctions here. I think, say, there are some of the objectivist philosophies I reviewed. This wasn't an immediate review. I did a review once of a book by David Kelly, Evidence of the Sense. I thought that was a very good book. But then others, say Leonard Peikoff, I hadn't thought his book. I reviewed his book Philosophy of Ayn Rand. I didn't care for it very much. And Ominous Parallels. I mean, he's done some lectures I read on history of philosophy that were much better. But one thing very much turned me off on his book on philosophy of Ayn Rand. He started off saying in the first page, well, something like, I'm the greatest expositor of this philosophy. This is the definitive philosophy. So that I said to myself, well, let's see how good he really is.
Yeah, you do like a challenge, don't you?
Oh yes, very much so. Yes.
Two books that come to mind as books that don't seem very analytically robust in some way, but really are inspiring, are Rose Wilder Lane's The Discovery of Freedom, and another one is that Tannehill book that's going to be getting a lot of new attention. It's written in the early 1970s, called The Market for Liberty. You know, these are two books. But The Discovery of Freedom in particular, I remember reading as an undergraduate and thinking, well, that's not very compelling. And then I reread it recently and I thought, this is a wonderful book.
Yes. I think one thing is very good on that. The style is very well written. I mean, I think one thing you bring out, I think, is very right. Sometimes a writer can, by depicting a certain point of view, can really give you a sense of what it is to live in a world that would be organized in that way. I mean, they're not necessarily dealing with particular arguments, but you say, if you read the Tannehill, you really get a sense of how a free market anarchist society might work. And I think this is another book. When you mentioned Rose Wilder Lake, say if you look at Isabel Patterson's God of the Machine, I think this is another book that has she's really good at picturing certain episodes in history and showing how interferences with the market led to difficulties for the societies, and how sort of having the market freed up the energies of people. So I think I try in the review to give somewhat of a blend of popular and more scholarly works. The kind I'm sort of what I'm most interested in is doing refutations of scholarly works that I can attack, but I can't always do it. That would be too narrow. So I think this is good for me also if I try to get it into more popular books.
You do. It's interesting. Now that you mention this, I'm suddenly realizing that this is one strain that you pick up in your publication over time, is that you're actually easier on popular works than you are on scholarly works.
Yes. I mean, I mean, it's.
I hadn't detected that before, but
I mean, if they're not. I mean, if someone isn't claiming to be a scholar, you really can't. You really wouldn't be fair to really jump on them.
How do you? It strikes me that it is difficult for a writer, especially if you're sitting down at a book, to strike the right balance between analytical proof and you can really, I mean, it can be very dull actually if you're writing a book on political economy or politics or something, to go out of your way to demonstrate every point you're making. How do you strike the right balance between writing inspirational prose and writing analytically rigorous prose?
Well, I think one thing that many people who are doing analytical writing can be made much more interesting than it is, so you can get it to be both analytical and somewhat inspirational. I think one way to do that is you do it kind of as a dialectic, where you not only give your views, but you get it as an argument, giving all the counter arguments on the other side. And I think one failing in many analytical works, or supposedly rigorous works, is that the authors will spend enormous amounts of time really repeating the same point, or going much more, elaborating points that are very obvious over pages and pages, and it gets to be very boring. So if you look, Nozick was one of the best at not doing this. Although he went to the other extreme, where sometimes some of his most important points are just in the sides. But say if you look at, Rothbard and Man Economy, it's extremely interesting work, very rigorous, but you see what he does when he makes a point, he'll then go on to the next point and build it up systematically. He won't just keep on and on with the same point. Some authors, I think, must have taken inspiration from the character in The Hunting of the Snark, who says, what I tell you 3 times is true, although usually for a much higher number.
That's funny. But you do get the sense when you read Rothbard that he's got so many thoughts. He's so creative that he's in a rush to finish it, and in a wonderful way. I mean, you sort of get swept along. I mean, he can't wait to finish making one point so he can make another point, then make another point.
Yes, very much. My greatest teacher, Walter Stark, used to say that he was talking about PhD thesis. He said it should be packed with matter. You have it filled with different ideas.
Yeah.
And this is the way, but a lot of writers don't do it that way. So just have the same point over and over.
The muses too seem to strike the right balance. I mean, I'm thinking about two books that are so different. Theory of Money and Credit, which is really this kind of comprehensive, careful look at monetary institutions, just point by point, and then in total contrast, liberalism.
Yes. Well, one thing I think Mises was perhaps one of the best, certainly one of the best. That one gets the impression reading him that he had the whole discipline of economics and social thought in his mind. He had exactly where he wanted each point to be. So he had everything planned out exactly. He read everything and he had everything in order. I remember when I was an undergrad at UCLA, I had a course with Friedrich Hayek, philosophy of social science. He was a visiting professor. He would when he gave lectures, which he gave entirely without notes, he was very systematic in this way. You could print what he said.
Really?
He was extremely
Isn't there a
precise.
German word that describes the capacity to sort of speak in publishable paragraphs?
Yes, that's right. I think I forget what the word is.
Yeah.
The Pope is supposed to have that quality. Yes, you ask the Pope something, he'll just give you a page.
Publishable paragraph. Yeah, that's brilliant. When choosing books to review, does the consideration of how popular this book is enter into things? I mean, there's so many books now that are published by academic presses that are so expensive, nobody's ever going to read them, So I mean, whereas there's other books that are published by commercial houses or independent publishers like the Mises Institute that are widely circulated. Does that influence you?
To some extent, say if a book has gotten an enormous amount of attention, then I'll say, well, maybe I have to review it. I sometimes try to promote books, especially academic books, that are not as well known as they should be.
Right.
I think this is important. I think now, although the magazine's published by the Mises Institute, I think I'm still justified in featuring Mises Institute books, because I think even though some people might say, well, I shouldn't do that because I'm writing for the Mises Institute, but I think these are very good books, so I try to emphasize them.
It is interesting. It's an important point worth making that you tend to review Mises Institute books not because they're published by the Institute, but despite the fact that they're published by the Institute.
Yes, I mean, I think these are very important scholars. Like I always say, if people were concentrating, if people in general academic life read, say, Hans Hopper or Tom Woods rather than Rawls or Eric Foner, we'd be much better off.
Yeah. I recall reading one time some book. It was a book about what books to read, and the only thing I really was left with was the opening section of the book that said there are almost an unlimited number of books that you can read in a lifetime. We have to pick and choose, so we have to have a system for doing so.
Yes, it is. It is unfortunate way. I tend to read quite a lot, but I find there are many more books that I want to read that I just can't get around to. There are just so many new interesting titles that come out. I tend to look. I go very much by publishers' catalogs. If say there's certain books that are arousing a lot of scholarly interest, especially in philosophy, I'll tend to look at those.
Yeah.
And go through them.
Do you remember that time we were hanging around in Acres of Books?
Oh yes, that was one of the very good. They have everything there.
Yeah, that was a funny moment, and I'll just say it that we were you were kind of tagging along. We were going through the books, and I said, and I had a big armful of books, and really, this is a huge store. How big is it? It's just like a football field.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, there are several. You can get lost there.
Yeah, you get lost there. And I asked you, how come you weren't getting any books, and you said, well, I've already read all these. Do you remember saying that?
It sounds like something, I don't remember that, but it sounds like something I could have said.
Yeah, and I thought you were teasing. So, and truly, I didn't know at that time to the extent to which that was true. So I played a little game with you, and I said, I just grabbed a book randomly off the shelf. You don't remember this, do you?
No.
And I said, oh yeah, have you read this one? And you said, yes, actually on, I think it's footnote 415 on page 212, he makes an interesting point about something. And I opened it up, and sure enough, that's exactly what it said. And I know listeners aren't going to believe this story, but I was there. I mean, it was an amazing...
Oh, well, I suppose in my younger days, maybe I could have done something like that.
If you were going to tell people what overlooked books in the history of... What books in the history of liberal ideas are out there, what are the ones that you would most want to draw attention to, given that everybody knows about, say, Human Action, Man, Economy, and State, or Atlas Shrugged, or these kinds of things? What books do you think are really important but not that haven't received enough attention?
Let me see. Well, I think one that, of course, at one time was very much studied, but isn't now, is Herbert Spencer's Principles of Ethics. I think that has a lot of good stuff. Sometimes people tend to dismiss Spencer as a philosopher now, but that's an extremely good book. One I think is what of Mises' very short book called Bureaucracy is extremely good, because you really get really shows the difference between the market and the bureaucratic management. It gives a very good brief presentation of his ideas. Now, Omnipotent Government is an extremely good book. I mean, it gives you a real sense of the development of origins of the Nazi system and fascism in the 20th century. I think
written the same year as Road to Serfdom.
Yes, that's right, 1944. I mean, it wasn't as popular as Road to Serfdom, but I think it's much more detailed in the economics in Road to Serfdom, and much easier reading. Also, let me see, something that I was trying to think on Murray Rothbard, that I think, I don't know, I wouldn't describe this as neglect, but I think people, probably not as many people have read it as they should, because it's at least somewhat expensive, is Murray's History of Economics. That has, you see, I think many people might first say, well, I'm not a technical economist, I'm not that interested in the history of economics, but it's really, besides being a history of economics, a history of thought, really, general intellectual history. And I think especially if you read his chapters on Marxism, is really outstanding in showing the same pseudo-religious background of Marxism and Hegelian philosophy out of which Marxism came. So I think that's an extreme one that really more people should have a look at.
What about Hayek? Constitutional Liberty is very famous. What other books? What other works by Hayek do you think are worth?
Well, the one I like very much is Counter-Revolution of Science.
Right.
Because it gives you sort of the background of the French positivist thought under Auguste Comte. And the first part is one of his most detailed statements of his views on methodology of the social sciences and individuals. There's a view nowadays that's, I think, wrong, that Hayek somehow abandoned methodological individualism. He was sort of became interested in complexity instead of methodological individualism. But I don't think he ever changed his real views. There's more of a continuity in Hayek than most people think. Well, one book Oberon Herbert's a very good writer.
Oh yeah.
The follower of Spencer who extended him. And, I think Liberty Fund has a volume of his essays that's very good. I think he's certainly a good one to read.
And what is the name of that?
It has what is it? Compulsion is in the title, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Actually, probably the Mises store needs to carry that one.
Yes. One other book, one other author is very good. Is Felix Morley's a very good writer.
Right.
Like Freedom and Federalism, Power in the People is a very good one. Oh, and another one I could go on. It's a Bertrand de Jouvenel on power is very good. Some of his later stuff isn't as good, but on power and ethics of redistribution is very good.
Yeah, ethics of redistribution. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I think we carry both of those titles. Unfortunately, they're in print. Felix Morley is I'm not sure that it's in print actually. Now he's an interesting guy, right? Because wasn't he an editor at the Washington Post?
Yes, he was. Yes, and he was. I think he was a supporter of non-interventionist foreign policy, and then he was one of the founders of Human Events, I think, also.
Yeah.
But he was also, he had studied at Oxford. He studied Sir Ernest Barker was his tutor, and he was a very good writer. He was from a quite famous family. Christopher Morley was his brother.
Right. But he was part of that whole generation of along with John T. Flynn,
Oh yeah.
That they seemed to, in their youth, I don't know if Morley was among them, but in their youth they thought of themselves as progressives and liberals. And then the New Deal came along, and this regimented society, authoritarianism imposed from the top down a new planning style regime. And they considered that they stuck with their old liberal faith, and that the sort of official American left had sold out completely to the corporate state.
Oh yeah, yes, I think you certainly have that in John T. Flynn. He felt that he hadn't changed, but that other people hadn't yet. I mean, many people were quite turned off by Roosevelt. Al Smith was another one like that. Although he wasn't in the old right, but I mean, he felt that Roosevelt, he was a sort of a standard Democrat, but then he felt that Roosevelt had gone much too far.
What do you think was more of a watershed in terms of the history of liberalism, the Progressive era and American liberalism, the Progressive era or the New Deal?
Well, I would say more the Progressive period, because I think Murray Rothbard was very good at pointing this out, that really the New Deal just continued and extended the trends, especially in World War I, extended all the various programs, but it really carried them out much further, and I think sort of had a split in some of the progressives, where some of the progressives recognized that they wanted to go more towards centralization, and there were another part of the progressive movement was simply kind of favored some sort of liberal reforms, but they really were not in favor of centralization, so they were the ones who came out against the New Deal. They didn't care, but it's sort of an intensification. So the New Deal was really an intensification. It carried it to a new level. That was like Hegel and Marx always said, quantitative change becomes a qualitative change after a while.
What books are you planning for the next issue? Can you tell us? What are you working on?
Well, I'm not fully just, but I mean, there was a very good book, probably going the next issue, although not absolutely certain. One by Doug Rasmussen and Doug Denial. It's a book on sort of justification of classical liberal ideas from an Aristotelian perspective. It's a very long book, so that would probably be one of them. Then there was a book I'd probably review. It's a guide to writing writing history by Mark Trachtenberg. That it is a professor of political science at UCLA. It includes one chapter, a couple chapters give a very revisionist account of American entry into World War II, and also discussion of Fritz Fischer and thesis on Origin of World War I that's very critical. So it's ostensibly just a guidebook, but he has some very interesting new stuff in there. So that would probably be one of them.
Good. And if an author wanted to get his or her book reviewed by you, what would he or she do?
Well, I sometimes I've had a few people write to me asking me for book reviews. If they do that, then I'll generally read the book. I don't always review, but I do read them. I've had authors complain that I haven't reviewed them. I sometimes wonder why anyone would do that if they read my reviews.
What about an affectionate inscription on the title page? Does that help?
Not as much as money, but it would. It never hurts.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you very much, Dr. Gordon.